Thank you for joining. My name is Neil James and I am the Director of Client Engagement at ReviewPro. This is the fifth installment in ReviewPro's Education's webinar series for hoteliers. We have hundreds of attendees from around the world here today, and we extend a warm welcome to everyone. And thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. We have a great webinar for you today on how to measure the return on investment of social media. Firstly, before I hand over to Josiah and Daniel, I wanted to provide a quick overview on ReviewPro. ReviewPro was founded in 2008 with the idea that social media could be used to drive revenue growth by increasing guest satisfaction and loyalty. We have thousands of hotel clients in more than 70 countries globally. We have some of the most important names in social media and many medium and small hotel chains around the globe. Our analytics are focused on providing insight for action in all areas of a hotel organization, from sales and marketing to quality and operations, and also distribution and revenue management. That's why our clients are using our solution to make better informed decisions that in turn empowers them to better serve their clients. Our background working with such a diverse client base will bring a lot of real-world practical experience, and we'll share some of these with you in the session today. To find out more about ReviewPro, please visit reviewpro.com/demo. And now to introduce our presenters. Daniel Craig is a former hotel general manager who helps hotels adopt the latest tools and best practices in social media and reputation management. He collaborates with ReviewPro as an industry advisor. And Josiah McKenzie is our Director of Business Development. He works closely with ReviewPro clients, hotels, to increase their sales by providing better customer service through social media. So without further ado, let me hand over to our presenters, Daniel Craig, and firstly, Josiah McKenzie.
Thank you, Neil. So just a few housekeeping items here before we begin the presentation. To ask us any questions that may come up as we go through this, please use the module on the sidebar. Your line is on mute just to ensure high audio quality for everyone joining us today. But if you send in your questions using that sidebar module that you can see on your screen here, we're going to collect all the questions to present at the end of this webinar. Your questions and comments are only seen by us, the presenters, so we'll filter those out and address those. Also, I would encourage you to tweet in any questions that you have as well. Just be sure to use the @ReviewPro username, and we'll pick up on that and again address the questions at the end of this session here. So at this point, I want to pass it over to Daniel to run through our agenda for today's call.
Thanks very much, Josiah, and welcome to everybody. It's great to have you here. And for those of you who have been at our previous webinars, today our subject is a bit drier, not quite as fun as our last subject, which was all about how to respond to guest reviews, but equally, if not more so, important. Social media has dramatically changed traveler behavior, and yet marketers often find themselves in the hot seat trying to justify the time and resources they need to manage social networks. And this is really happening right now as budgets have been submitted or are being submitted, and now we need to decide where we're going to spend our money next year. So today, Josiah and I are going to make it a little bit easier for you, or try to do so, and we're going to discuss how to measure the ROI of social media. And we're bringing in two experts from the industry to share ways to evaluate the success of social networks, to guide strategy, and to determine the resources to dedicate. So whether you're a general manager who's a bit skeptical about social media, or you're a social media manager, you're going to learn ways to first look at assess why it's important to measure ROI, and then set objectives, and then measure ROI and we're going to look at three main ways to measure ROI: social analytics, website analytics, and review analytics. And then we'll talk about a few other important measures of success in social media that we should look at as well. And then at the end, we will have time for questions, and as Josiah mentioned, feel free to send in or tweet your questions along the way. We'll get to as many as we can at the end. And then I will pass it back to Josiah to talk about why it's important to measure ROI.
Great, thanks, Daniel. So you may be wondering, why are we devoting a whole webinar to this? Why are we going to spend the next hour looking at how to measure ROI? Well, first, it's important to understand the impact of social media on your hotels specifically. Sometimes we see huge numbers like 800 million Facebook users, 175 million tweets happening every single day, and these high-level trends are important. But what really matters to your business is what's happening at your hotels. And ROI measurement can help you understand the impact social media really has on you and your organization. Secondly, it's important for guiding strategy. What should you even be involved in? It's important for convincing your executive team to get the resources that you need to execute on some of the ideas that you have. Once you have those resources, measuring ROI and looking for areas of success is really critical to make smart decisions as you prioritize time and resources. And then finally, it's really important to get the buy-in of everyone participating. You want to demonstrate value and show how these activities are going to help each person with their job. So if we can go to the next slide here, we're going to talk a little bit about setting objectives. And setting objectives is really a prerequisite for calculating ROI. Because first, of course, you need to identify what your objective is for these programs. You know, it may be driving revenue, it may be building awareness, might be increasing guest satisfaction, maybe it's managing reputation. You know, most likely it's going to be a mix of each of these, but the more specific you can be, the better. So once you've done that, you need to create a way to measure progress toward these objectives. And to do that, what you need is to understand which key performance indicators mean something and which are really unhelpful. There's too many what we call vanity metrics out there, and we're going to come back to this. Daniel will explain this in a little bit more detail later, but you want to be looking at numbers that actually are going to tell a story and that provide that direction. And then to communicate the progress that you're making, what you want to do is develop a custom report for your organization that's very specific to the work that you're doing. You know, this report needs to be easily understood. It actually needs to mean something. And while it's great to be a numbers geek as a marketer, it's really something that our panelists are going to talk about. You need to communicate this to people that may not be so involved in the day-to-day activities here. So you want clarity in this, and you want this to tell a clear story. So before we go any further, I'd like to go back to the poll that we had up before this webinar started, and it was on the topic of how to measure the ROI of social media. So if we could put the results up on the screen there, Neil, we have we got almost all of you participated in this, and it was great to get your feedback on that. But let's first look at the results here. So the question was, how does your hotel measure the ROI in social media? The number one answer that you gave, with 48% of you selecting, was by reach. So you're measuring the number of followers, the number of likes. Looks like you're building a platform here to engage more people. The second highest response was actually tied for two places here. People looking to measure in terms of engagement, number of retweets, shares, comments, things like that. And then that was also tied with, with the number of revenue. Let's see here. The screen here is a little bit different. So reach was the number one response. By reputation and reputation management metrics was the second highest response that you had, with 39%. And then we had the third result tied at 36% each on engagement, on revenue, and then a third of you saying that you currently do not measure the ROI in social media. So Daniel, what are your thoughts on that? Does that reflect what you've been hearing from hotels?
Yeah, I'm actually a bit encouraged. It sounds like people are really paying attention and making an effort to measure the results of their activity. In other industries, it's not as high, and so clearly we have a very active group with us, which is great to hear. 36% don't currently measure ROI in social media at all. That's actually it's quite common, but of course we're going to talk about why that kind of needs to change. So very interesting results, and that brings us to our next slide, which is about measuring ROI in social media. And eConsultancy and Adobe came out with a survey in July. Really interesting results. They surveyed 650 marketing professionals across Europe and North America, and they found that only 12% of companies reported being able to track the direct revenue impact of social media. Now, that's not to say that they're not getting revenue through social media. They're just having a challenge tracking it. So for those of you who aren't currently tracking it or are not happy with what you're tracking, you're not alone. So the job of the social media manager, and whether you're a marketing manager handling social media or director of sales and marketing or even general manager, the role of managing social media has gotten quite complex. And there are three main responsibilities for social media managers. One is managing the community. The second is really developing content. And then the third is analytics. And analytics has become an essential skill for hoteliers. And it's not an issue. The challenge is not an issue of shortage of data. We have all sorts of data available at our fingertips. The challenge is being able to sort through the data to find meaningful metrics for assessing the success of our efforts. So now our social media managers must not only be resourceful and creative, they have to be analytical as well. So often, as we see from the poll and we hear through various surveys, people turn to what Josiah touched on, vanity metrics. And essentially we call these vanity metrics. These are shares of likes and followers and page views. And they're important to have a look at, but they don't always tell the whole story. It's almost like a popularity contest, but it's a matter of the number isn't as important as the quality, because what we're trying to do in social media is we're developing a community of people online who share an affinity for our brand and who are engaged with us, who will share our content, and of course who will stay with us and will recommend us. And if we have this huge community full of people who just liked our page in order to enter a contest where win something for free and won't do any of these things, then that number doesn't really tell us the real picture. The numbers are not that important. So we need to dig a little deeper, and so we turn to more meaningful measures like reach, engagement, advocacy, and revenue. And some of these things we can measure directly, others we only get kind of an indication of how well we're doing. But we've divided the three types of metrics today to present to you into social, website, and review metrics. And just before we jump into that, I wanted to share an eMarketer survey with you, which was a survey. It was done by a company called Awareness. They surveyed 469 US marketers from a variety of companies in July and asked about how they're measuring ROI. And essentially they broke it up into two sections, brand awareness and revenue generation. And so if you look at the top, again, 96% are using those vanity metrics to measure their performance, and then it kind of drops off as you dig a little deeper. Traffic to website, social mentions, share of voice, things like that. These are all things that we want to measure to get an idea how we're doing. And then of course revenue, because if we're not generating revenue, is there any point? It comes down to the success of our business is our ability to generate revenue. So we want to look at new customers, leads, sales, etc. And then we look at the bottom, customer satisfaction, one of those metrics that isn't always easy to measure, but when we look at review metrics, actually that is becoming very much a science. So we're going to dig a little deeper in many of those different metrics. And to start us off, we're going to talk about social analytics. And I'd like to introduce Mitchell. And Mitchell Fawcett is a marketing communications manager with O'Neill Hotels and Resorts. And he has been in the hotel industry for over 10 years. He started in operations and then moved into marketing and public relations. And then as social media became more prevalent, he moved into a newly created position with O'Neill Hotels and Resorts, and he now oversees social media strategy for their collection of 7 hotels and resorts in the US and Canada. So welcome, Mitchell. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Daniel. So measurement is really key in my position, and it works really well that I'm a bit of a numbers geek at the same time. And one of the reasons I love social media is that it almost seems like it was built from the ground up with marketers in mind. There are a ton of useful metrics built in that can really help how we track our results and drive our strategy. So I'm going to talk about Facebook and Twitter today, which make up a large part of our strategy. And we really quickly realized that those vanity metrics that we were talking about are a really small piece of the pie, and one that has very little to do with engagement, which is where our success lies. So I'll talk about this in more detail, beginning with Facebook Insights. And Facebook page owners have access to this. It's a huge amount of data about their fans, and it's all completely free. So this graphic here is a small snapshot of what you can see. I'd recommend going to Daniel's blog, where he has a link to a 15-page document that Facebook published to help understand all these different kinds of metrics that are part of Insights. It can be a really intimidating amount of data to go through, but I'll share with you what I consider to be the most relevant for my properties. So the most closely related to engagement that we discuss among my properties is the talking about metric. So this is tallied anytime someone likes your page, likes a photo, comments on a photo, mentions or tags your page, and so on. Basically anytime someone interacts directly with your page through a post or via the newsfeed. Reach, which Facebook defines as the number of unique people who have seen any content associated with your page. So this is a really interesting number that takes into account how many friends your fans have. So when a fan engages with your page, a story is generated to their friends, and here we really see the potential of our content to grow organically. Virality is the number of people who have created a story from your post by sharing it. So this is important for us to watch because it helps us determine what type of content our fans are most interested in sharing with their own networks. Check-ins, when it comes to hotels, this is one of my favorite types of engagement to see. So this occurs when someone uses a smartphone to check in and share their location with their friends. And then demographics are drilled down by Facebook to gender, age, country, city, and language of your fan base. So as hoteliers, we already know our guest demographics, but this helps us understand which of them are the most social. And then page views and unique visitors is measured on Facebook as well. And we're very familiar with these from a traditional web perspective. But in our eyes, page views and unique visitors still very much counts towards our overall web equity. So I'll give you an example of how I use Facebook Analytics. I do this most often when it comes to content planning. So a month in advance, I plan out a conversation calendar for each of my hotels, making sure it's a good balance of frequency, topics, and so on. As I'm doing this, I look at the past month to see performance of each of the individual posts. So right away, I'll start to notice trends. For example, at our resort in Arizona, we get really high engagement on destination-focused posts. So guests are really looking to us for ideas on activities and attractions when they're coming to visit. At our ski resort, for example, we noticed that in general, Friday tends to be our highest day for engagement, which isn't surprising, thinking people are probably dreaming of a vacation after a long week at work. But these are really insightful things and great for us to keep in mind when we're planning the month ahead. And so moving on, I'll talk a little bit more about Twitter. And I'm a big fan of using Hootsuite. And in general, Twitter metrics are much simpler. Hootsuite is a really fantastic tool to moderate and post content. And it also has some really great analytics that are built in where I pull reports. So the most important engagement metric would be retweets and mentions. And then we drill that down as well by pulling the top mentions by influencers. So Hootsuite will use followers and clout score to determine which of your retweets and mentions were of the highest influence. We always, as well, look for photos, and this is, in my opinion, my favorite use of Twitter. You know, when people are taking their own photos and sending them out, it's great. It saves us money on doing our own photos as well, and it's really great to see guest perspective there. And then we measure guest sentiment as well, and not necessarily in a traditional sort of sentiment analysis, but we'll go through, and when we see guest providing feedback, we'll share comments and reviews that come in via Twitter and share those operationally as well. And I'll give you an example when we were able to do that. And what's interesting about operational involvement is that before, in a traditional marketing model, we really weren't able to engage in a two-way channel like we do via social media now. So now that we're communicating on this two-way channel, we get a lot of guest feedback at the same time. So at one of our ski resort properties, we were considering the possibility of removing the $14 charge for basic Wi-Fi. And as a part of our cost-benefit analysis, we used Hootsuite to pull data from our Twitter followers looking for keywords like Wi-Fi and internet. We got really valuable feedback about the effect that the charge was having, and this data that we pulled was a really strong influence in eventually making the decision to offer Wi-Fi complimentary.
That's such an interesting example, Mitchell. I'm sure a lot of hotels and hotel brands can relate to the negative feedback they get via about their Wi-Fi charges if they still have them, and I'm seeing more and more brands that are capitulating and offering Wi-Fi, or at least basic Wi-Fi, for free. And when we get into the review metrics section with Josiah, we can dig a little deeper about how we can use reviews to guide these types of decisions. Great.
So finally, I'll share with you an example of a social analytics report. So analyzing and synthesizing this data is the most important part of our measurement. So an example of one of the reports I'll share, when it comes to Facebook, I'll go over all of those insights that we just talked about. I'll also review each month the most popular post. And again, this really helps us refine our content, understand what's the most engaging, the most shareable, what our guests are most interested in hearing. We track revenue as well from booking widgets that we have built into Facebook, as well as any offers that are posted directly on there as well. We look at website traffic when it comes to Google Analytics showing Facebook.com as a referring site. And then we review, again, that guest feedback, and this is where we really discuss this operationally. And then going through Twitter, it really comes to much of the same touch points. So I review these reports with the directors of sales and marketing and the general managers for each of my properties at a minimum on a monthly basis. So we dive even deeper quarterly and annually. These meetings are really important for us to connect. This helps hold me accountable, and because I oversee multiple properties, it also gives me an opportunity to connect with them to get updates on brand programs, need periods, on property changes, and so on. Initially, a portion of these meetings would be spent educating on some of the basics of social media, the platform's terminology, all these types of metrics, and so on. But there's still really a learning experience for all of my hotels now when I bring them up to speed on the changes in social media and the different trends. So these concepts are really important for everyone to grasp so that management can provide leadership while still understanding how social media is a part of the hotel's entire business plan. And now that we've been up and running for a while, we can really start to compare our performance to last year. And obviously, we look for steadily increase in rates growth, as well as an increase in engagement as we refine our content. And as a marketer, what I think about most, and what I think my directors of sales and marketing and my GM should be asking, is how are we doing things differently? Just because the social landscape changes so frequently, and so does the way that our guests take advantage of it. So diving into our analytics really helps us not just in measuring our success and our strategy, but how we can evolve that as well.
That's really interesting, Mitchell. Thanks very much for sharing that insight. Now, of course, we focused on Facebook and Twitter, but there are all sorts of social media platforms out there, and I guess it depends what you're actively involved, which platforms. But we've just listed a few of the other major platforms here, and some of the similar metrics that we want to look at to measure our performance and to create accountability for our social media efforts. And I'll pass it back over to you, Josiah, to introduce our next presenter.
Thanks, Daniel. And actually, just a quick reminder here I want to throw out. We're getting a lot of questions come in, and if you have any things come up as we're going through the ideas that we're sharing here, just use the sidebar module to send us your question. We're going to collect and address these at the end of the presentation here. But I'm really pleased to have Martin Soler join us from our partner WIP. WIP is a hotel marketing agency with offices in Paris, Barcelona, Rome, and Tampa. The focus of WIP is to create marketing campaigns for independent hotels and groups of hotels that focus on high ROI. And they do this by tracking and analyzing booking patterns to produce websites and advertising campaigns that generate the most yield. Based in Paris, Martin Soler is the company's marketing director. He's a former hotel general manager, a seasoned marketer, and a talented photographer. So welcome, Martin. Thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Josiah. So I wanted to cover a few things about social media analytics and, of course, the tracking, which we do a lot of. On this slide, you'll see the Google Analytics will give you the usual visits data, such as traffic sources, social visitor flow, which I'll go into more detail later, which pages they're visiting, etc., etc. What's important to know, and I believe many of you may have it already, but you've got to install e-commerce tracking on your booking engine. That's where you're going to start seeing if you're actually making direct revenue. I know there are questions about generating direct revenue. It's true that it's not going to be a huge, you're never going to get a ton of direct revenue from it yet, but you can measure direct revenue with e-commerce setup on your Google Analytics. Otherwise, ask for your marketing agency if they've got another solution. We've developed our own, but there are some like Microsoft Atlas. Sabre uses something called ResTrack. There are other systems which can measure all the way through to the bookings. On the next slide, we're covering just the social traffic sources. Social media does give a lot of traffic. We've seen Facebook generating, I think it's the second largest traffic generator to hotel websites. We have about 1,000 live websites we're working, our hotels we've developed their websites for, and we see social media drives a lot of traffic, but it only makes about 1.6 to 1.8% of the bookings, and it's over 10% of the direct traffic. That's a lot for a single source. That's just on Facebook. So visits is one thing, and that's good, but when you go into the social visitor flow, which is the next slide, you start to be able to see how deep they're going into your site. This is all part of Google Analytics. You can see those that are going into second, third interaction. Those are most likely your more qualified visitors. They're actually checking rates, they're checking the rooms, they're checking dates, etc. When you start seeing that, you know you're getting the right kind of people, the people you want to your website. Those that just go on your home and drop off, which is going to be a lot of them. Unfortunately, that's, well, most likely not the main visitors or the visitors that are going to book. Now remember, we're a marketing agency that is focused on ROI, so we want people to book. We're really focusing on getting people that book. I'm going to talk to you about getting people that book. Right, so there's a couple of things that's interesting to know. This is just a very simplified version of our tracking where we can see the person has gone onto Google, gets onto the hotel website, gets onto Synexis, back to Google, and so on. And you've got the Facebook visitor, and after the Facebook, he's actually done his booking. Now we've noticed, and that's an interesting thing, we've noticed that shoppers or people, guests that are booking via Facebook, that's normally they come to Facebook and book shortly after. The few bookers that we do get that come from Facebook actually book almost instantaneously. They shop less. On the next slide, you'll see somebody who's searching. As soon as it's up, there we go. He's coming from Google, he's searching, he's going to a hotel, and he goes on the booking engine, back to Google, etc., and then he's going to Facebook. And so on, this guy is shopping. You can clearly see he's checking several hotels, and on average, we see people checking about 10 different hotel websites. Google's analysis is about 17 different sites, including OTAs, etc. We see them visiting 10 different hotel websites when they're searching. So that's sort of a trend we're seeing, is that via Google they shop more, via social media they book almost directly. It's an odd trend. There's less bookers, but they don't shop in the same way as the people that are going via social media. Now, on the next point, this is something, once you have e-commerce set up and goals set up in your Google Analytics, you can see the touch points that you saw on the last slide, how social media, it's not just the last refer or the refer that brought the conversion. It's a lot about, as much about touch points as it is about direct referrals. And in Google Analytics, it's called assisted conversions. You can see here, social media is pretty low, but that also depends on how the tracking is set up. This is a sample of a hotel who's using a booking engine. Because of the nature of booking engines, sometimes you will have trouble, so make sure your booking engine support team has really set up the tracking correctly, because that's where you can lose a lot. Otherwise, get another system that can track it. But it will bring conversions. It will bring slow conversions and not necessarily the biggest quantity, but it's definitely part of that process where people are shopping and they find the Facebook page, or they go and check the Facebook page, get reassured, and then book. So on the next slide, I just wanted to cover briefly, we did a survey of over 20,000 guests this summer. That's over the last few months. We checked after their booking how they discovered the hotel. Oddly enough, the friends and family is number one, OTAs is 2, so that's the billboard effect, etc. But what's interesting here, okay, so Facebook and Twitter only account for 1.8%. But what is interesting is friends and family is number 1. And how did they share the information? We don't necessarily know. They didn't write that it was a friend and family who shared that by an email. We do see it sometimes, email links being shared. But social media is the communication channel that's probably the number 1 communication channel to share information, share your stay, etc., etc. So that's where your social media strategy is probably affecting the friends and family part. It might not be, you will never see that as a referring site, and the person won't attribute it to Facebook or Twitter because it's his friend and family. As far as the guest is concerned, he got the information from his friend that that's a great place to stay at. So you've got to think with that when you're measuring the ROI. That friends and family, if friends and family is growing exponentially and you're doing a Facebook campaign, those two could be linked. So these are just a few ways you can track. It's important to get your e-commerce set up or get a better tracking system than that, which you can get via certain booking engines and certain marketing agencies. And get people to share it, friends and family to share it, etc. That is your number 1 source of new reservations and new guests. And with that, I think I've covered most of the things I wanted to say. I'm going to turn over to Josiah.
Thanks, Martin. Great tips there. So the third key aspect that we wanted to talk about today was about measuring ROI through review analytics. And I'd like to talk about 2 main things here. First of all, being looking at some key performance indicators, and secondly, looking at some ways to use review analytics for revenue management. I'll show you the basic process that our clients at ReviewPro are using to make some money with these insights. So we can go to the next slide here. Before we develop objective-based key performance indicators for your company, it's really good to look at some high-level analytics that are generally applicable across all hotels. Now, the screen up here is from the ReviewPro dashboard, and it basically gives us 3 numbers. The first one on the left is the ReviewPro Global Review Index. This is a quantitative summary score that factors in star ratings across more than 100 different review sites. And it's crucial to focus on this as a way to benchmark performance over time and between properties. It helps you move your focus to improve guest satisfaction everywhere instead of just on a handful of review sites. In the middle, we have the number of reviews for this property in the sample. And both quantity of reviews and quality is really key for placement on many review sites. So encouraging happy guests to go online and tell their story is really influential in increasing your visibility online. And then on the left, we have the semantic analysis summary. Semantic analysis is really just natural language processing that breaks down all of the feedback that's been written by guests online, and it helps you understand the sentiment they have towards each aspect of your hotel experience. This can be a really powerful operational tool and another key reference point to understand the health of your online reputation. So we go to the next slide here. The second big key performance indicator that I really recommend hotels look at is their ranking in the city that the property is located in. So this is really crucial for people finding you. On the bottom, you can see an example of how we automate the tracking of this in ReviewPro. But when you think about some of these top online review sites and online travel agencies like TripAdvisor and Expedia, people may not go beyond the first couple pages of results for a city, whether it's Chicago or Paris or London. They want to see the top hotels. So if you're on page 10, there's a high chance that they're not even going to find the hotel on that review site, on that distribution partner. So just keep an eye on that. And then if we move to the next slide here, kind of continuing with this idea of benchmarking performance against your competitive set, here we have a chart that compares the Global Review Index for some sample properties. It really gives you the perspective of what your potential guests see when they evaluate your property versus similar hotels. So in ReviewPro, you can actually go a step further and benchmark your property on specific attributes like service, room amenities, value, and so on. And it gives you an honest picture of again, just what your guests and potential guests are seeing when they're going through that shopping process. Okay, if we go to the next slide here, I want to talk a little bit about using review analytics to generate measurable revenue growth. So ReviewPro clients are really doing this in three main ways. First is making pricing decisions based on the hotel's Global Review Index score, looking for opportunities to raise rates when guest satisfaction scores are high. There's actually a very specific methodology around this, and we're devoting an entire webinar to it next month, so watch out for that. But here on this screen, we have a breakdown of guest satisfaction by review source. And I mentioned earlier that it's important to have that global perspective of reputation. Revenue managers are really using insights like this to optimize their distribution strategy. And the thing is, different OTAs and distribution channels charge different commission rates, and they may reach different audience. Maybe they're popular in a certain country, and looking at some of these regional players really gives you the intelligence that you need to make smart distribution decisions globally. Okay, go to the next slide. The third big part of optimizing revenue growth is using positive online feedback to increase your conversion rates. So our clients are using the ReviewPro publishing tool and quality seal to give their website visitors the confidence they need to book directly. And someone may be wowed by the visuals or what they see on your site, but the question typically comes up when they're thinking about making that booking is my experience going to live up to this marketing? It looks great. I want validation that this is a great place to stay. So if you can have your happy guests almost become like salespeople for you through sharing that social content on your website, it can play a big role in saving commissions if you can get people to book directly. It also gives these hotels more control over that booking experience. So regardless if you're using one of these strategies or just exploring this at this stage, I just really want to encourage you to think about how you can use social media and review analytics to be a bigger part of your selling process. So again, just want to remind people on the call here, if you have any questions, use the sidebar module, send those in to us, and we're going to be addressing those shortly. But back over to you, Daniel. What are some more benefits that social media gives hotels?
Okay, thanks, Josiah. So we've talked about social analytics, website analytics, review analytics. We've talked about the importance of having a report, and one of the things Mitchell touched on is one of the challenges of reporting on all these different areas is all the data is very dispersed. So you're basically creating, there are many people who are creating a spreadsheet through Excel that integrates this data, and more and more of these various sources are going to be integrated. So that should get easier, but for now it's a bit complex. And we talked about the importance of a conversation calendar like Mitchell uses, which I think is a great way of tracking and planning with your social media activities. And then Martin touched on Google Analytics and the new features that they offer to help guide or to help analyze our social media activity. And then finally, Josiah with review metrics, the importance of using guest reviews to guide our distribution and our rate decisions. So just a few other areas to touch on when we are assessing the effectiveness of our social media efforts. Of course, we want to look at the SEO influence on search rankings and visibility. Social activity, social content does help our search rankings, so we need to take that into consideration. It's huge. And of course, psychographics. So in Facebook, we can launch much more targeted marketing campaigns. So rather than our traditional spray and pray type marketing, we can actually target people based on their activities and their preferences. And of course, social media does generate or encourage more direct booking, so we can save some of those commissions that we pay, as well as strengthening relationships, building loyalty, and that all helps the bottom line. And of course, we can save money in our marketing expenditures versus traditional media, advertising, print, collateral, trade shows, things like that can be very expensive, whereas social media tends to be a bit more economical. And then, of course, the real-time feedback. Josiah talked about this, but the importance of just hearing about how guests are responding to our services, our amenities, even our marketing campaigns in real time. So it's important not to, when we're looking at this, not to exaggerate the role of social media and dedicate too many resources, because paid advertising, things like email, blast, cost per click, online travel agencies, they're still driving more direct bookings. And people are still booking mostly by more traditional channels. So social media acts as an amplifier to paid media and helps to drive traffic to these channels. So Josiah, if you want to wrap things up, and then we'll go to questions with some key takeaways.
Absolutely, and so many great ideas here. So just quickly recapping some of the top concepts that we talked about before we go into the question session. The first point here was that there's really this need to use ROI metrics to guide strategy, to obtain resources, and to create buy-in across the organization. The ability to measure ROI is critical if you want to make things happen at your company. Second, measure ROI based on business objectives. You want to personalize the way that you measure and report progress for your situation. Third, create a ROI report to track key social, website, and review metrics. Each of these 3 categories is important to look at improvements that can be made in each of the 3 categories there. Fourth, look beyond vanity metrics to reach engagement and conversations. Vanity metrics may look impressive at the first glance, but if you want data that actually means something, you have to dig a bit deeper. And then finally, consider additional benefits like cost savings and efficiencies when assessing returns on social activities. You've got to look at the whole picture here. So we can go to the next slide. Wrap things up. So right now we're just collecting and processing all of your questions. Again, use the sidebar module to send those into us. Tweet us at ReviewPro. We're processing those now. We're going to address those in a moment. But just wanted to mention, if you're wondering exactly what we're doing at ReviewPro, basically the company is designed around collecting comments about hotels on the web. We track more than 100 sources in 36 languages to make sure that you don't miss out on any opportunities for service or engagement. So we bring all these conversations into one dashboard so that you can see individual pieces of feedback. We also create analytics about guest satisfaction by department, by property, and by group, so that every person in the organization has an easy-to-interpret report with insights that they can use to increase guest satisfaction, improve operational efficiency, and drive revenue growth. And of course, do all of this in a very measurable, reportable way. So I invite you to see the whole thing for yourself by visiting reviewpro.com/demo or email us info@reviewpro.com if you'd like a little bit more information. Another big part of what we're doing is creating educational content. like this session today. So I'd like to pass it back over to you, Daniel, and can you tell us a bit more about what this all includes?
Yeah, so this webinar is part of a series of webinars that that I'm working with ReviewPro to launch. I think it's our 5th to date, and those of you who registered will get a link after the webinar where you can do it on your own time, and it will be live for a week, and then it goes into our Learning and Support Center, which is a new resource center exclusively for clients of ReviewPro, where we have all sorts of case studies, statistics, examples, and we'll be housing all of our webinars. Now, I think we have all sorts of questions. I was looking through them, and I think we will take some of these questions and bring back in our presenters to answer a couple of them. There are a couple quick ones. A question regarding one of Mitchell's slides, which showed a report that he shows to when he was talking about what he presents to ownership and general manager, etc. It was showing a screenshot of Hootsuite built-in report. There's a question about that, and then there's a question from Martin Solar. Okay, here actually, we'll throw this one out to the group. This is from Mark D'Amico. How do you, and we've got a couple questions regarding this, and this is a really good question. How do you search Facebook posts and tweets for keywords like Wi-Fi and internet? Josiah, do you want to take a stab at this?
Right. So there's a number of different tools out there that offer the ability to search through that content. It's something that we track as part of ReviewPro Save Searches, where you can monitor conversations based on keyword for public Facebook posts. Obviously, something to consider on that network is a lot of the conversations happen behind the login. A lot of them, the privacy settings are set where only people in that network can view the conversations. But if the post is public, if it's on a public page, you can use a third-party tool to pick up on those conversations and respond to them.
And that brings to the point, an important point of so much of stuff on social networks is private, and we don't know about these conversations going on among messaging and private profiles, etc. So we really need to focus on the public aspect of it, and as well the difference between structured and unstructured content. Things like review ratings, etc., are structured. They're easy to measure. They're easy to follow and assess. Whereas unstructured content, which stuff that Facebook commentary, even Twitter commentary, content in reviews, that tends to be harder to track and measure. But of course, analytics tools like ReviewPro help us do that, help us organize and collect that information.
Yeah, Daniel, I'd love to get I'd like to get Martin's feedback on that. But just one point on structured versus unstructured. Sometimes hoteliers think that it's an either-or conversation. I think they need to be used in tandem. Quantitative structured feedback, like a star rating, is very important for benchmarking because it's numerical. You can track this over time or in a comp set. But the unstructured feedback, when you think about all the written text in a TripAdvisor review, for example, there's a wealth of information there, and actually many more details that can be acted on than a simple star rating. So you have to look at the qualitative feedback through semantic analysis on reviews, for example, in addition to that quantitative benchmarking. But Martin, did you have any other thoughts?
On the data, I think the hotels need to use as you said, they have to check the value and the rankings. Unfortunately, neither the rankings nor just the content is going to be enough. It really has to be a combination of both. And what we use the most is really looking for sentiment analysis. That's really how we try and track the most, using tools like yours, like ReviewPro, to verify what is it in a positive or negative context.
Mitchell, did you have anything to add to that discussion?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Martin says about sentiment. That can be a tricky equation, but when you can employ any sort of monitoring service to help out with that, it's a great benefit.
Okay, thank you, Mitchell. And that question I referred to earlier for Martin, it was just a quick question. He was asking about when we were looking at sources on tracking booking sources, and he asked whether the tracking back was the general visit to Facebook or specifically to the Facebook page of the hotel. And Martin responded that it was actually, they're actually tracking the Facebook page of the hotel. Correct, Martin?
That's correct.
Okay. Great. Did you decide you have another question you want to throw out?
No, I'm just going through this. We got a lot of good questions. Actually, there's one just very brief one here asking how to juggle this on an international level when you're. It was probably not so much related to ROI measurement, but if you have an audience that could be speaking multiple languages, how do you deal with that on a Facebook page? The great thing is Facebook recently introduced features where you can target posts for just a subset of your fans that speak a specific language. So with one page, you can address, French, German, Italian, Japanese, any language that you want to be targeting, all from one central place. There's no need anymore to create multiple pages.
Good point. There's been a couple questions regarding whether this information is applicable only to the big brands and bigger hotels or to smaller properties, even B&Bs. And the short answer for me would be that it's applicable to all types of hotels. Obviously, it depends on the resources you have available to track and analyze this information, but even the big picture information is important to the smallest of properties because social media is a platform for engaging travelers, engaging your guests, and as we've been talking about, directly or indirectly driving revenue. Anything to add, any of our panelists on that subject?
I can say we've tested it on, we've worked with a lot of small hotels, independent hotels, and on their social media. The factor isn't so much the size of the hotel, more than if there's something to say. There has to be a story to tell. There has to be something special, something unique to talk about, because that's when people will interact. If you're going to just have a regular hotel which doesn't have much, it's just cheap and it's small, there won't be that much interaction, and people won't necessarily have an emotional impact when they get to the site or interact with you, and thus it has no long-term or short-term effect on the bookings. And that's really, I'm talking bookings, but that's really what we've noticed. It's got to have a story to tell. There's got to be something visually or location, the deco, things happening around it which are really interesting and interact with people.
Some great points there. Josiah, any further comments or another question for the group?
Just one quick point. I think you make a very interesting statement there, Martin, and I think it speaks to being honest whether social media or a specific social network is going to actually add benefit to your marketing campaign. And that's the whole reason behind tracking analytics. I mentioned earlier about less looking at high-level trends like hundreds of millions of tweets being sent every day. It matters if tweets are going to be relevant for your audience or if they could be relevant. And so it's taking a fair assessment and letting the decisions be driven by numbers as opposed to getting caught up in the euphoria of a big trend happening.
All right, maybe we'll take another question, and I might comment on this and ask Mitchell what his take on it is. This is from Eva, and she asks, Facebook has recently added Facebook offers. Do you think it is a good idea to use Facebook as a selling point and not just as a socializing and making the customer more loyal to it? So good question. I think if any way we're able to monetize Facebook, our time on Facebook, without directly turning people off by being too promotional, I think we should take advantage of. And Facebook offers does present a great opportunity for that, as well as having a web booking widget on the Facebook page, but I think we've all seen that the results of that are pretty disappointing. And I think the big thing to keep in mind here is, for the most part, people don't go to Facebook to shop. They're going there mostly to socialize. So we need to play within that environment. And when people are going to review sites or online travel agencies, they tend to be more in a shopping mode. Now, Mitchell, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And what I would say is the key that I always look for is balance. And when I go back to that conversation calendar that I posted an example of, it's a really visual and easy way for me to make sure that when we do have more of like a hard sell focused post, which Facebook offer would be a perfect example of, but it's really well spaced out. Honestly, I aim for no more than 2, maybe 3 times a month to have a post that's more related to any sort of offer, and just respecting the very personal and social space that Facebook is. But you know, I absolutely think that monetizing Facebook is something that we can look to do. The booking widgets that Daniel mentioned, I agree, we don't see a huge amount of conversion through those at all. But Facebook offers, and since it's a relatively new concept, I think is still quite novel. And depending on the type of offer you post, can be almost more of a way to reward your fans rather than to sell to them.
Some great points, Mitchell. Thank you. Josiah, did you have further comment or another question you'd like to throw out?
I think that was great, Mitchell. Let's go for another question.
Okay. We did have a question that came in. What are the best and worst platforms for measuring ROI, i.e. Facebook versus Pinterest, etc.? And some of you may be able to comment on this. Just to note, Pinterest doesn't actually, as far as I know, they don't currently offer any sort of analytics dashboard. So you need to use a third party for deeper analytics, like I think there's PinReach and Pinnerly that offer a dashboard for, especially for Pinterest. Same with Twitter. It's interesting. Twitter doesn't actually. It's been talking about launching an analytics tool, but they don't have an analytics tool. So we're looking at tools like Review Pro to help us with that tracking and managing, as well as Hootsuite that we saw from how Mitchell's using that for Twitter analytics. Anything to add to that, panelists?
I would agree. Pinterest seems to be the trickiest one to grasp at this time. Twitter definitely is a little bit lighter on the analytics, which can sometimes be okay. I think Facebook leads the way with such seriously in-depth information. And I'll touch quickly on a point that Katie Gorga asked a bit earlier about the type of report that I used in that screenshot. What I actually do, because I find that there's so much information via Facebook Insights, is I download the full Excel spreadsheet. And this has something like 15 tabs and probably 40 different columns of information per tab. Just with that volume of information, I find that that's the easiest way to sort through it and segment via time frame and look at those analytics that we find the most important.
Okay, thanks so much, Mitchell.
It's interesting, Daniel, because I think there may be some people on the call here today that are wondering, why did we go into such depth creating custom reports, going through each of these aspects? But taking the time to do that really creates a cross-platform way to accurately track the impact that this is making on your business. And you know, we heard Martin show a framework for attributing value to the impact of social and having some real statistics behind this. This is really powerful stuff, so it's going to take some time, but it's very important to make sure that your digital program succeeds and you're able to expand it in the right direction.
And it's not going away, is it? It's we're getting more data available, and it's getting more complex. So we can't run away from it. We need to face it square on and figure out how to find meaningful measurements in the activities we do. So on that note, I think we'll need to wrap things up. We've come to the end of the webinar. Thank you very much, Mitchell Fawcett with O'Neill Hotels and Resorts, for sharing your wisdom, as well as Martin Soler with WIP for sharing your insights. And then thanks very much, Josiah. It's always a pleasure. And thank you to everybody who joined us. We hope you found this insightful and helpful. And we look forward to hearing your follow-up questions after the webinar. And we'll close it with that. Thank you very much, everyone.